put it on gallery.
Do you see where the view settings is, Holly?
Yeah, I do. I know.
Okay.
I just trying to figure out which is best.
Gallery would be for anyone who's speaking, and view would be anyone that's on the call.
Okay.
I find gallery gets hard with so many people, so I switch to view if that's any help, Holly.
Agree. I second that.
Yeah.
Let me blow this up. Whoops, no, I didn't mean to do that.
It's 1 o'clock.
Okay. Let me close this. Hi, everybody. I'm Holly Stallworth. I'm the designated federal officer for the BenMAP and Benefits Methods panel. And we begin our meetings with a statement about our compliance with the Federal Advisory Committee Act. So bear with me while I read this. So this panel is a panel of the Chartered SAB, which is a federal advisory committee established by Congress in 1978 to provide scientific advice to the EPA administrator. Our meetings are held as public meetings that meet the requirement of the Federal Advisory Committee Act. We're an ad hoc panel of the SAB, and this panel's report will need to be reviewed by Chartered SAB members and approved before it is transmitted to the EPA administrator. We give advance notice of meetings in the Federal Register. This meeting has been noticed in the Federal Register, and the panel's discussions and deliberations are held in sessions where I, as the DFO, ensure that the requirements of FACA are met. This means the requirement for open meetings, for maintaining records of deliberations, and providing opportunities for public comment. Today, we do not have any requests for public comment. I'll be taking the minutes of the meeting that will summarize the discussion and action items in accordance with FACA, and those minutes will be certified by our panel chair, Dr. Drew Schindel, and posted on the SAB website. I want to thank everybody for complying with our confidential financial disclosures and all the paperwork required to become special government employees. It was a burdensome task, and everybody got through it. We've reviewed all of that information relevant to conflict of interest or appearance of a lack of impartiality, and determined that there are no conflict of interest issues for any of the members participating in this review. For people who are watching this meeting on YouTube, I would appreciate it if you send me an email to confirm that you're watching, because as the DFO, I need to keep records of who's watching. So that's stallworth.holly@epa.gov. You can find my email on the meeting webpage. And the meeting webpage is at epa.gov/SAB, and then you click on January 13th. I think that's all I have for now. I'll turn the meeting over to our Staff Office Director, Tom Brennan.
Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to this public meeting of the SAB BenMAP Benefits Model panel. Thank you to the members of this panel for taking time out of your busy professional schedules to help EPA with this important review. And a special thanks to Dr. Schindel for agreeing to chair and the extra responsibility and work that comes with that. So thank you, Drew. And to all of you, I want to personally thank you for your public service. I'm looking forward to today's charge question review and model demonstration. Getting this demonstration before the panel's in-depth peer review is really a great opportunity for this team to better understand the model. And I want to also thank my colleagues from the Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards for the presentation that you're going to give today, and for all the effort and all the work it took to even get this product to the point where it could be peer reviewed. So congratulations on that, and thank you for today's support. And now I'd like to turn it over to our chair, Dr. Schindel. The meeting is yours.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you to everybody for joining. I don't know who from the public is here, but I appreciate your willingness to engage in this. And I want to start by saying we really appreciate this collaboration with the US EPA. We're thankful to Dr. Stallworth, to Mr. Brennan for helping set up the panel's work and facilitating it, making it so useful for us to have these interactions with EPA staff. And we really appreciate the work of Air Quality Planning and Standards, Dr. Sasser and Dr. Maniloff, Mr. Fan, and Deputy Director Johnston, who has all been making this what we are expecting to be a very fruitful collaboration. So we're looking forward today to learning from EPA, and then at the end of our panel's work to providing what we hope will be constructive and valuable feedback from the SAB. So I am Drew Schindel. As you've heard, I'm the chair of this panel and I'm a member of the Scientific Advisory Board. I'd like to begin or proceed to introduce the rest of the panel. I think I'm just going to do this very briefly rather than go around in the interest of time so that we can devote most of our time today to other pressing business. So I'm just going in alphabetical order. The panel consists of Peter Adams from Carnegie Mellon University, Joseph Aldi from Harvard University, David Bale from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, Jonathan Buonocore from Boston University, Mark Dickey from the University of Central Florida, Davin Henza from the University of Colorado at Boulder, Ling Jin from Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, out in Berkeley, naturally, Michael Kleeman from UC Davis, again in California, and Nikolai Kumanov, who's from Arizona State University and also at the National Bureau of Economic Research, Rob McConnell, University of Southern California, Matthew Needell from Columbia University in New York, Enid Neptune, Johns Hopkins University in Maryland, Stephen Newbold from University of Wyoming, Jonathan Patz, University of Wisconsin at Madison, Christy Pullen-Fedenik, who's from the Center for Earth and Energy and Democracy out in Minnesota, Lisa Robinson, again from Harvard, Ted Russell from the Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta, Scott Speck from University of Iowa, and last but not least, Christopher Tessem from the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. So those are our panelists. It's a group that I feel very privileged to lead. There's a very diverse and talented team here. And what we are planning to do during today's public meeting is to begin with, once we finished all of these introductory remarks, to discuss the charge questions that the panel has been asked to provide responses to. That will take roughly the first hour of the business part of this meeting, again, post the last introductions. And we will hear from the staff about what's in those questions, what the intention is, and there will be a chance for all of the panelists to ask questions of the staff and to gain more insight into what the staff are looking for and how we can best be of service to the EPA. Around 2:20, so again, roughly an hour from now, we will switch gears slightly. And once we're done with question and answer and discussion of the charge questions, we will have a demonstration of the BenMAP tool, the benefits mapping tool, from two of the EPA staff who have been closely involved in the creation of that tool. That will go for roughly an hour and a half. That will again have a chance for the panelists to learn about this tool, which is really at the heart of half of our charge questions. Our charge questions cover a first set on benefits methodology more generally, and then a second set focus specifically on the BenMAP tool. So we feel very privileged to be able to get a walkthrough and demonstration of that tool, which should greatly facilitate our work going forward. Well, then I will briefly return at the end, along with Dr. Stallworth, to discuss next steps and formally adjourn the meeting by 4 o'clock. So that's what's in store. We are running nicely on time, even perhaps a moment ahead of time. So with that, I think we are ready to go on to the next agenda item, which would be hearing from Dr. Erica Sasser, the Director of the Health and Environmental Impacts Division of the Air Quality Planning and Standards Office. Or Tom, it can go back to you if that's more appropriate procedure. But I'll turn it back over to someone at the EPA staff.
We'll just
Thank you.
pick up Erica if you're there, Erica.
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks, Holly.
Wonderful.
And thank you, Drew. I am Erica Sasser. As Drew just said, I am the director of the Health and Environmental Impacts Division. So I'm within EPA's Office of Air and Radiation. And on behalf of the Office of Air and Radiation, I want to welcome all of you to this panel and thank you in advance for your service. We are very much aware of how much time it takes to serve on a panel like this. And we're also aware that we're giving you not just one charge, but two, essentially, between the BenMAP model itself and the other methods questions that we're asking you. So we really appreciate your time, your insights, your expertise as applied to these questions. We look forward very much to what you have to advise us and say to us. So thank you very much for that. I also want to stress within the world of air pollution, the model and the methods that you are going to be reviewing are some of the most critical for the work that we do at EPA. These methods and this model are used in some of our largest air pollution regulations, and the estimates that we generate using them are very influential in the public dialogue. And so we look forward again to what you have to advise us with regard to the way in which we approach this and whether there are improvements in the model and the methods that we should be considering. I do want to note that the staff that you will hear from today and throughout the review, the EPA staff, are experts. They have been working in this field, in this area, and on these models and methods for decades. I encourage you, as you go through your exploration, to ask questions. Oftentimes, we will see that a panel has questions or confusion. Typically, EPA staff will not interrupt you. We do not like to interfere with the panel's deliberations, but we are very happy to address questions. So if you have a point of confusion or a question, or even a question about how did this come to be, or why is it this way, please ask, and the experts who are on the phone will be able to give you the history and the explanation and hopefully clarify things. And we really value the input that you are going to be giving us, as I said, for improving the quality of EPA's work, the quality of our regulations, and the estimates that we use to support them. It's very important. So thank you all for that in advance. And with that, I may just turn it over to Dr. Pete Maniloff and Dr. Neil Fan, who are going to be your shepherds, your guides through the technical presentation. And I believe we're going to start with the charge questions. So not sure if Pete or Neil, either one of you was going to kick it off.
Sure, I'll kick it off. Yes, we met yesterday. So Pete Maniloff. So Neil and I, for the next hour, are going to do sort of four things to contextualize the charge questions. So I'll try to give the staff level take on what we do and what we're hoping for from this process. Neil will explain the role and the content of the technical support document that we've asked you to review. I will comment on and introduce our new software tool, our new version of BenMAP, and then present the charge questions. Please ask questions as they come. For those of you familiar with the economics culture, I'm quite used to questions in the middle. And feel free to speak up if I miss your hand. So as Dr. Sasser said, we provide estimates of the impacts of air quality changes on health and health-mediated outcomes, such as lost schooling. This can be a part of the cost-benefit analysis of proposed EPA regulations. It's also used for other purposes, such as research projects. The users include EPA staff, such as myself and Dr. Fan and Dr. Chen, or Mr. Fan, we'll say, and Dr. Chan on the line. Also, external researchers, some of our panelists, other government agencies, a broad range of users. And this is quantitatively important. So these benefits that are estimated by BenMAP that are estimated with BenMAP are, in a typical year, the largest regulatory benefits estimated by any federal agency. These estimates have a key role in the agency decision making and in supporting the decisions we make, and thus the downstream policies and environmental outcomes. So how does this work in a big picture? So first, integrated science assessment assesses the science linking health endpoints or outcomes to exposures. If the integrated science assessment, ISA, assesses that a link is causal or likely causal between a health endpoint and a PM or ozone exposure, then we try to quantify that endpoint. So we try to assess how many outcomes there would be, and we try to monetize it. We do that with the best available study or studies to find estimate of the number of the change in incidence. And then if valuations estimates are available, we try to monetize that. So we're asking you to review two separate things, right? As Dr. Schindel explained yesterday, this technical approach that we take and our new version of the BenMAP software that implements that approach. We view these as separable. We could implement the technical approach, in principle with calculators or spreadsheet or MATLAB. BenMAP makes this much more feasible, but it's just an implementation. So most of our effort, or at least much of our effort, is on the scientific modeling. So we use projected air quality changes. Those are an input to BenMAP. We use these projected air quality changes from any plausible change you could use. The method is agnostic to that. And we use those to calculate the changes in counts of deaths, asthma cases, and so forth, as part of this formal regulatory often as part of formal regulatory impact analysis. That means that we are doing this sometimes in the methods described in the EPA's guidelines for performing benefit cost analysis and following the OMB's Circular A4. So let me comment on feedback we're looking for. So I'm going to sort of feedback we're looking for and feedback we're not obviously, other feedback we would obviously welcome and take quite seriously, but that we are not explicitly asking for. So we are specifically looking for feedback on how we operate. So it is our criteria to select new risk estimates, new estimates of the magnitude of a linkage between PM or ozone exposure, for example, and some health endpoint. And we're obviously interested in how we can improve our methods. We're not looking for feedback on whether some currently selected study or current risk estimate is the particular best one in the literature. And the reason for that is that the science changes, right? And so we don't want to be boxed into, we don't want to be continue using a specific study as if the science advances. We're hoping for feedback on and guidance on our methods to continually update our studies as the science advances. I also want to note how we're thinking about the agency's environmental justice analyses. So we currently can use data exported from BenMAP to examine environmental disparities, and we'll maintain that capacity. We can export BenMAP analyses, particularly incidence analyses, at a spatially reasonably fine-grained level and by varying demographic characteristics, and we can use that for subsequent analyses. However, the agency has other bodies and another process managed by another office of the agency, considering how the agency should consider environmental injustice broadly. This will consider air pollution as well as environmental disparity, and as well as other realms of environmental disparity. So obviously, we would be happy to have feedback on what we're doing and the data, but looking forwards, we will be also needing to follow the broader agency process on how to analyze environmental justice concerns. I want to emphasize another point, and that is that perhaps airborne PM and ozone is one of the most data-rich areas that the EPA regulates. So we have, when we are choosing studies, when we are doing our analyses, a relative wealth of both direct data resources and scientific information to draw on. Some other offices may not have such so much data available just by the nature of the specific exposures they are concerned about. And so advice that is appropriate for this context may not be feasible in other settings. We just encourage the panelists to keep this in mind when drafting your report. Okay, so in closing, I want to reiterate something that previous introducers have said. Please ask questions of us. You can email Neil or me. You can ask us in these sessions. We'd be happy to take time, have the time during these sessions or via email or in other sessions. So yeah, that's all. And I'd like, if there's questions, I'd be happy to take them. And if not, I'd be happy to pass the mic over to Neil to introduce the TSD. Yes, Dr. McConnell.
So I have a question about the last point you made about how advice we would give might not be feasible in other settings. Does that imply that BenMAPS is used in other regulatory settings within EPA to assess other chemicals, or what does that comment mean? How is that relevant to us?
Thanks. That means you could imagine a sentence, when analyzing particulate matter and ozone, the agency should do this. The agency should use this standard. The agency should use this process, something like that. Or you could imagine a sentence that said exactly the same thing without the when analyzing PM and ozone initial clause. The latter, we would encourage you. The latter could be interpreted as constraining other divisions of the agency that consider different exposures.
Thanks.
Dr. Adams?
Yeah, thanks. I have kind of a similar clarifying question. You said something about environmental justice and capabilities that BenMAP has in this regard, and what you're looking for from our review and how it relates to kind of a broader EPA approach, I guess. And I also just kind of feel like I missed the take-home point of what you want us to do or not do in terms of this review.
Sure. I think I want you to be, there were 2 points I was trying to make. One is that there's no button or menu or anything like that labeled environmental justice in either the legacy version or the new cloud version of BenMAP. It doesn't do any sort of disparities. It doesn't spit out any disparity summary statistics explicitly. However, we are able to use it as part of our analysis of environmental injustice and disparities currently, because it produces measures of incidence and changes in the incidence at a spatially and demographically refined level. And we can then use those results to look at disparities. So that's point one, is that even though it's not explicitly labeled, it supports, there's no EJ button. It does support our current workflow. The second point is, this is obviously how we should consider these issues is obviously something the agency is considering and thinking deeply about. And, the administrator has emphasized it, and our group has been working on this. And there's a broader agency effort that we are, there's a broader agency effort that's thinking about how the agency will consider environmental justice and environmental disparities moving forwards across air and water and all sorts of exposures. And we anticipate that we anticipate being bound by that guidance. Dr. Sasser?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I was just going to chime in and maybe amplify a little bit the bigger point here. I think what we are saying, not just with regard to environmental justice, but also with regard to other aspects of cost benefit estimation, is that this process and what we're asking you to look at is situated in a bigger context. And we acknowledge that bigger context. There are many aspects of it that are important. Not all of those aspects are under review in at this time. So we are asking you to look at pieces of a system. Those pieces focus on PM and ozone methods and a particular tool, BenMAP, that we use for purposes of estimating PM and ozone benefits. We are not dismissing the many other questions that could be asked or answered and that are relevant to this. We're just saying those are somewhat outside of the charge for this panel. So, for example, environmental justice, it's a huge area of concern for the agency. Our work touches on it, as Pete has explained very well. However, we are not centrally asking you here to review environmental justice methods. We are asking you to review the data inputs that might be used that could theoretically feed into such an analysis. So I hope that helps. And there are other aspects of the agency's economic guidelines and OMB's requirements for us that again are broader, they're binding, they're not the focus of what we're talking about in the next couple of months.
Thanks. Both those answers help me a lot.
Dr. Kleeman?
Hi, thanks. Clearly, BenMAP is used widely outside of EPA as well as within EPA. In the context of this process, should we focus on EPA's use of BenMAP, or should we think a little bit more broadly about how the community might be using it as well?
That's a good question. I think our priority is EPA use. And we would obviously prefer for it to be more useful to outside users. And we would obviously prefer it to be more useful to outside users, right? Often we're in a resource constrained setting in terms of what features or capabilities we support. And sometimes outside users and agency users' needs will push in opposite directions. And in either of those cases, we typically prioritize agency needs, but we would absolutely welcome comments on what would be more useful for outside users. Dr. Schindel?
Thank you. Yeah, just a question. You answered very clearly that the office is, this part of the Office of Air and Radiation is interested in PM and ozone, and the other pollutants are handled by other parts of EPA. I'm just wondering how much it would be useful for us to consider that the effects of exposures to multiple pollutants, including PM and ozone, but perhaps at other things as well, might be different than the effects of exposures to single pollutants. Thank you.
Neil or Erica, would one of y'all field that?
Sure. Can you hear me okay? Great. Okay, outstanding. So I think the short answer to that question is yes, that's the type of feedback that would be helpful, both as you're reviewing the TSD, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment, but also BenMAP as a tool that's designed to quantify air pollution related deaths and illnesses. Is it to the extent that there are features that you and the other panelists believe that should be built in, for example, to account for, just as an example, temperature modification of air pollution related effects, or multi-pollutant effects, using, incorporating interaction models from the epidemiologic literature. That would be helpful feedback. Does that answer? Okay, great. That answers
Yes,
your
thank
question.
you.
Sure. Are there other questions? Because if not, this might be a natural segue for me to talk about the TSD. Okay. I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to give a very brief overview of the charge questions that cover the TSD. And then Pete and I prepared some slides that we're going to walk through. And then I think that the next order of business is to do the BenMAP demo. So I will save you all from reading the charge for the TSD. But let me give you just a brief bit of historical context for why we developed the TSD in the first place, and how this marks sort of a point of departure for the agency from its historical practice. So up until the point at which we published the TSD, our standard approach was to reevaluate the empirical basis for our benefits analysis each and every time there was a new integrated science assessment, or before the advent of the integrated science assessments criteria documents published. And we would carefully review those documents, identify which health endpoints or outcomes were either likely to be causal or causally associated with the pollutant of interest, as determined by the ISA. And then we would select among the epidemiologic literature to find the best concentration response parameters that could be incorporated into BenMAP. And then we would identify a corresponding method for estimating the economic value of those impacts. One of the limitations of that approach is that we were tied to the publication schedule of the integrated science assessments, of course, but then also the regulatory impact analyses that we would publish as part of revising the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. So in cases, for example, in the year, I guess it was 2019 or 2020, where the agency elected not to alter the PM standard, there was no natural vehicle for us to essentially develop and document the new methods that we would want to incorporate that were built on the integrated science assessment that had been published for PM. So that is part of the reason that we wanted to develop the TSD. The other reason is there was no single document that would identify exhaustively the criteria that the agency would consider when identifying appropriate endpoints to quantify, would describe our approach for selecting the evidence, parameterizing concentration response functions, identifying appropriate economic valuation functions, and also describe all of the other input parameters for a benefits analysis, including, for example, baseline incidence rates, population parameters. So we wanted to essentially develop this document that would be living and that we could update over time, and that would not necessarily be tied so explicitly to the NAAQS rulemaking schedule. Having said that, our plan obviously is still to update the TSD to reflect the best available evidence as it comes available. So for example, as the agency publishes new integrated science assessments for PM and ozone, we would go back through the process of evaluating that literature and then updating the TSD. So that's the historical context. The charge questions are broken into basically two, I'd think of them as two different groups or buckets. So the first charge question is essentially asking you as a panel to evaluate the extent to which the criteria that we have identified for selecting appropriate evidence is appropriate, and the extent to which the agency faithfully followed or applied those criteria when selecting among the available evidence. The remaining charge questions, to varying degrees of specificity, ask you to provide feedback on, for example, the agency's approach for projecting baseline rates of death and disease, determining whether we're using the right population parameters, or if there are alternative population parameters that we should be using. There's a question in there about what is called the 20-year segmented lag, which is the assumed lag between exposure to PM 2.5 and changes in the risk of mortality. this is a lag structure that the agency has been using since 2004. And for example, we thought it would be helpful to have the SAB provide feedback on that. So, and then finally, of course, we would be grateful if you would provide feedback on our approach for characterizing uncertainty. So that is the charge related to the TSD, and that's a bit of historical context. And with that, I'd like to transition to the slides, unless there are questions about the TSD charge. Enid, looks like.
Yeah, sorry, I was on another kind of a webinar that I had to chair. But one thing, and you brought this up at the end, and I found it particularly kind of interesting, is that the 20-year lag, does that describe kind of an initial exposure during adulthood, or can that exposure occur during kind of development as an infant, as a child, and then extend for the same period of time?
Yeah, I love that. That's a great question. So that lag is one that we apply to estimate the temporal distribution of adult mortality. We separately estimate PM attributable infant mortality, but we don't apply this lag structure, partly because we don't have enough evidence to know what it would look like. And so for that reason, we only apply it to adults. And within the lag, there's certain assumptions that have been made around the etiology of PM-related death and disease. So, for example, there's some number of years in which we assume that people are suffering from PM-induced cardiovascular failure, some number of years that we're assuming that people are dying from PM-related lung cancer. And so the question in part is, what does the evidence say now, as compared to what it said back in 2004, and is there a reason to believe that the lag should be updated?
Okay.
Does that help? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. It looks like Lisa, you may have a question.
Yeah, I think I'm having the same problem that Drew does when I would click on reactions. I don't get the raise hand button. But anyways, I have another question that has to do with the boundaries around the analysis, similar to what we were talking about earlier with other pollutants and environmental justice. In the area where I work on economic valuation, there are a number of other efforts that are ongoing that will affect the agency, for example, to update the VSL, including the rewrite of Circular A4, the update of the EPA guidelines, and some work I think that's being done for EPA's NCEE. Is what you're telling us that our job is to talk about the approach and the criteria for picking these estimates? Or how far do you want us to go down the path of being precise in terms of recommending values? And where's the stopping line?
Pete, do you want to answer that, or would you prefer for me to?
Why don't you field that one?
Okay. All right. So I'll answer that in two parts. Let me first say that by design, we have explicitly not asked the panel to address the VSL. We didn't feel as though this was the appropriate forum to do so. There are other opportunities to do that. As is the case with the health evidence, we would find it most helpful for the panel to consider the criteria that the agency specified for selecting economic valuation estimates, and also the extent to which the panel believes we followed those criteria. You should, of course, feel free, if you would like, to provide feedback on specific unit values. But because we're trying to set up a series, basically a protocol that the agency can follow for continually reevaluating the evidence, we're most interested in investing time and effort into making sure that the criteria are correct, rather than whether you believe or other panelists believe that specific economic unit values are necessarily the right ones. Does that help?
That's very helpful, although obviously all these other efforts have criteria too. So it's I don't know whether it's a balancing act for us or for you, but there is a juggling act there.
Fair point. Okay. Other questions? Okay, if not, then let's transition to the slides. Great. Okay, so we have a handful of slides that we'd like to walk through that are meant to orient you to the tool itself, BenMAP, as well as the content of the technical support document. So Dr. Maniloff and I will be presenting these slides. I'm going to address the first couple and then the last. Why don't we go ahead? Actually, Will, if you would, unless I can control it from here, which I probably can't, this is perfect. Okay. So we believe that a little bit of historical context could be helpful here. I'm not going to dwell on this, but I think partly I was asked to present this slide because I have the distinction now of having been the longest running BenMAP user in our team. The agency has been quantifying air pollution, well, PM 2.5 specifically, impacts going back to 1997. So as Dr. Sasser mentioned, there is an extensive history in the agency to quantifying these impacts. And as Dr. Maniloff mentioned, the estimated value of air pollution related benefits are the largest of any reported agency benefits in the federal government. That is due in large part, obviously, to the science, but also to the BenMAP tool that's used to quantify those impacts. Beginning roughly 1997, the agency began to, as a routine matter, quantify PM-related benefits and ozone-related benefits, beginning, as I understand it, first with the Section 812 analysis, which was a report that estimated both retrospectively and prospectively the benefits and costs of the provisions of the Clean Air Act. In roughly 2003, we worked with a contractor to develop a slightly more user-friendly version of the tool and use that for a good decade. Partly because the code was proprietary, and partly because by that point, it didn't actually play very nice with our EPA computers. We developed this new version, what was then new in 2012, called BenMAP Community Edition, which was also graphic user interface driven, but it ran on open source code. The code was posted to GitHub for everyone to either scrutinize or build off of. And I don't think that the importance of the program can be understated in the agency, given how frequently it's been used by the agency to estimate PM and ozone-related benefits as part of the regulatory impact analysis production process. So with that bit of historical context, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Maniloff, who's going to talk a little bit more about the input parameters to BenMAP and how we actually quantify benefits. I think you're still muted.
Okay, thank you. This is sort of an orientation that I find useful to keep in the back of my mind. Right, there's an inverse relationship. The most common things there that we, the things with the highest incidence, and in both baseline incidence and generally in incidents that we see changes of incidence attributable to changes in air quality, are the least severe, right? Which is, I guess, heartening. They generally also have lower unit values in dollar terms. And ultimately, about 95% of the benefits in most of our analyses of the monetized benefits come from avoided mortality. So those are just a couple of things I find useful to keep in the back of my head as we do this. So next slide, please. So what do? We have a baseline equation that we use for, pretty much all of our outcomes, in which the change in incidence delta Y is a percentage change model. So we have some baseline incidence rate. This would be for PM, a change in PM delta PM. It could be a change in ozone delta ozone, and some coefficient beta that we have pulled out of the scientific literature. And then we multiply that times a baseline population. So we have for each of our endpoints that we are monetizing, for each of our endpoints that we are estimating the health impact, we have these 4 distinct inputs. We have a spatially detailed population map. We have a spatially detailed pollutant change map. We have a spatially detailed baseline incidence. And then we have an effect estimate that generally varies by demographics in somewhat gross bins. The effect estimate, the population, and the baseline incidence are all contained in BenMAP. The pollutant change is something that a user will input into BenMAP on their own. Generally, users have a baseline map representing a business as usual, and then some counterfactual representing typically what happens if some particular policy were to be implemented. Can I have the next slide, please? So a smidge more detail for each of those inputs. The air pollution data can be modeled. These are several of our most common sources, and some of it can be imported in the legacy desktop version, but not in the new cloud-based version we'll ask you to review. That's not implemented yet. The population data comes from census data. We start with the detailed block level data stratified by age, sex, race, and ethnicity, and use forecasts from the private firm Woods and Pool, and aggregate that to a 12 by 12 kilometer grid. The baseline rates of death and disease come from the CDC data and projections, and then the concentration response functions are those beta terms that are the magnitude of the health effect. Next slide, please. So how do we select evidence for quantifying benefits? So we're trying to quantify as completely as possible the consequences of air quality policy, positive or negative. So we identify the health effects affected by the estimated change in exposure. That's one of the things that's coming from the periodic integrated science assessment, or has historically. We identify suitable empirical effects. Those are based on the criteria that we've asked you to review and that we're asking you to review whether we are following those. And then we estimate the economic value of these based on the best similarly defined criteria that we're asking you to review, finding hopefully the best available willingness to pay measures. Often for many of our endpoints in practice, we rely on cost of illness measures. And we reassess this periodically. So this is the technical support document that Neil mentioned that we are hoping to shift to a live and rolling approach. Next slide, please. The technical support document, we've asked you to read it and think about it. And it's written as a reference work, right? So it's written as a reference work that documents both the basis of our choices and the specific choices that we've made in voluminous detail. Okay, I want to pause for a moment. I'm going to shift topics a bit next. So I want to ask if there are questions at this time. Okay. So next slide, please. So we have a new logo. Sorry, previous slide. That's exciting. So we have a new logo for our cloud platform. So there's a legacy version of BenMAP that we are currently using that is a desktop application. That's the BenMAP CE that Neil described that was developed about a decade ago. It's a traditional desktop application, just like MATLAB or whatever else you use. You download it, you run an installer, you have your files on your hard drive, it uses your CPU. We've developed a cloud platform. So this is replicating the capability, but and it's sort of, it's purely a calculator. It's a fancy calculator that stores all the data and makes it easy to use, but it's purely implementing the methods described in the TSD, but on this cloud platform. So I'll discuss a bit more what that means during the demonstration, but I just want to make sort of explicitly clear there are two entirely different software tools that currently share a name. One of the things that we are hoping will arise from this is support that the cloud platform is appropriate for replacing an appropriate tool to use to replace the desktop version. And if the panel so decides that and recommends that, we anticipate shifting to the cloud platform for future analysis. We'll discuss the specific questions, but there's sort of three big picture things that I'm hoping that the panel will be able to provide guidance on for the new cloud version. One is the tool transparent and appropriate for use and transparent. So that. Two is really about the user experience. Does the user experience help the analyst make good decisions? This is, a tool that is designed for use by experts, right? It's not the most user-friendly, easy-to-use tool in the world. Neither is the desktop version, because there are often trade-offs between providing capability for the analyst to make choices and making things easier, right? Just like a higher level programming language versus a lower level one. And we're trying to provide the capability for professional air quality analysts to, the core of this is for detailed air quality analysis that analysts can make their own analytic decisions for their own needs as appropriate. That said, we want to make that easy. We want to guide those analysts to good decisions in their assessments and not confuse them. So does the software tool help the analyst make good decisions? And then the third big picture question is, what should we be thinking about for the future of the tool? Yeah, so those are our three questions on the software. Let me pause and again ask if there are questions about that. Yes, Dr. McConnell, I saw your hand first.
So you may have covered this and I missed it. There's some features of the software that clearly are adaptable. What the exposure range of a particular population might be, or what the population would be. So that's something that the software allows the user to modify to their needs. Is it possible, thinking about community, sort of the broader community use of the tool, or things that you might want to do internally at EPA as an exploration? Is it set up so that you can change the concentration response functions, or you could examine new endpoints that are maybe under consideration for adding, or do you get what you get?
So in the prior desktop version, you could add new ones for endpoints, for evaluation functions. there were some constraints on the algebraic functional form they could take, but given that you could upload your own, you could add your own values. We have not yet implemented that in the new cloud version. I'll show you in the demonstration the point where we choose, for example, bundles of endpoints to value, and we haven't added the capability to add your own new ones yet. I guess the importance of that's something that we certainly could add in a future version. So
will they both be? I mean, it sounds like maybe this is getting down into the weeds, but the desktop version continue to be available until that function is integrated into the cloud version?
I would say we haven't made an explicit decision on that. What we anticipate shifting our use to the cloud version and ceasing support and releases of the desktop version. That's certainly a capability we could add to the cloud version. Okay. Who's next?
I think Chris had his hand up before me, so go ahead, Chris.
Okay.
Yeah. Is the cloud version of BenMAP also going to be open source? And can we, as the committee or panel or whatever we are, can we view the code when we're reviewing it?
It is. It's the GitHub repository. There are a couple data sources. The GitHub repositories for the code are currently public, and we can share those with you the email after the call. There's also a database that's harder to share. Yeah, the database provides, those maps of all that data. Okay.
Thanks.
Dr. Kleeman?
Hi, so I think I heard an earlier comment that currently the cloud-based version can't import data. Does that mean then that we couldn't import the exposure fields? We would have to rely on some EPA generated exposure fields from CMAQ or something? Or did I mishear that when
Sorry, I was unclear. Currently you can upload your own air quality maps for a baseline and a counterfactual to get the difference, but you cannot upload your own population maps or other data.
Got it. Okay.
So the spatial and temporal extent and all the data associated with that is in there and fixed currently.
Thank you.
Any other questions, or shall we shift to the charge questions themselves? Okay, so I'm going to pull those up on one of my screens, and I'm going to just sort of walk through each of those in the very biggest picture, thinking with what we're thinking about and what we're looking for. And please, when on question in, please ask me questions about that one while it's, while we're on that topic. So question one. What we're really thinking about is what do we quantify and how do we choose the studies? And that's across the health and the valuation within the institutional setup that we are operating in that Dr. Sasser mentioned. So are we taking the right approach to choosing new studies? And thus, to having a dynamic process to use over time. So are there any questions about question one? Okay. So question 2.
Pete, I have a question on charge question 1.
Sure.
They, sub point C,
Okay, C.
considering blah, 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 the item 1, whether science or best practice guidelines would support EPA presenting multiple estimates of pollutant attributable mortality. Is that something that you currently do, or you're asking whether I haven't seen that before in ISAs, but maybe I've just missed it. Would this be some departure from what's currently done?
Neil, why don't you field that?
There we go. So going all the way back to, I think, beginning in 2004, 2005, maybe even earlier than that, the agency reported 2 alternative estimates of PM-related mortality that were estimated using 2 different long-term exposure cohort studies, one from the American Cancer Society and one from Harvard 6 Cities. Harvard 6 Cities. So, but over time, there have been many more cohorts developed and estimates of PM-related mortality. And so we have retained the presentation of 2 different estimates of PM-related mortality, even though there are many more cohorts from which to choose, partly as a way of characterizing the overall uncertainty associated with estimated PM-related mortality. I don't know if that helps or not.
Yeah, thanks. I actually was aware of this.
Okay.
Okay. Question 2, and questions 2 and 3 are really about data. So question 2 is asking about our baseline incidence data. So are we choosing the appropriate baseline incidence rates, to match up to ICD codes that are used in the health literature, and thus that our concentration response functions are tied to? So are we talking about the same endpoints that the studies are talking about? And then are we doing our spatial and temporal projections appropriately? And are these our spatial and temporal projections and our stratification appropriately? So we're asking for feedback on baseline incidence data in question 2. So are there any questions about that? Dr. Robbins?
Actually, it's just Ms. Sorry.
Oh.
I'll take the doctor though. I was actually surprised. So I haven't read the TSD yet as closely as I should and will, but
it's long.
Well, I've read a few of these before, but the 2E, I was sort of surprised at that question. Does it describe in the TSD? Does it describe what the rationale is for not doing that? I'm reading that as for not projecting morbidity rates. Or is that something that we need to talk about?
I don't think we have any text on the rationale for why we don't currently. It's technically challenging for all the various morbidity endpoints. There's better data for some than others, and so currently our current method of not treats all the morbidity endpoints the same way. The technical challenge is the core reason. The data input part of the technical challenge is the core reason.
So if we were to say, yes, you should consider projecting all of these, we would also be most helpful if we could tell you how to do that. Is that what you're telling us?
Absolutely. If you could provide us with suggestions on how to do that, then that would be great.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions on 2? Yes, Dr. Neptune.
Yeah, this is an issue that always comes up, and this refers to question 2D, where you talk about race and ethnicity stratification, and it always becomes a question of how that should be done in a way that's useful and in a way that's kind of respective of the different subcategories that attach to particular disparities. And I'm not sure exactly whether you want those kind of considerations invested in the address of that question.
Right. So, yeah, this is something that we are. Because I'll give you a 2-part answer. So one part is sort of to reiterate that we expect that our future approach to analyzing disparities will be within the context of other guidance provided by other processes at the agency and government, right? That said, we are wrestling, we anticipate that guidance. It's not going to be that granular, we don't anticipate because it'll have to be broad enough to cover a variety of exposures. And so you all have the expertise on how we would implement that in the future, we hope, and we would like your expertise on that. And so exactly those questions, right? There's of how we do this and how we connect this, how we like what disparities are we considering and what exposures, and how we link that, how we connect those data sources to the scientific literature that we're drawing the various risk estimates from. Your recommendations on that part would be much appreciated.
Okay, so right now it's Black, white, Hispanic, Asian,
Native American,
and Native American.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And age. Yeah. Yeah.
And there's not a mixed category or other category.
I don't think so. Is there, Neil or Elizabeth? I don't think we. No, I don't believe so.
No, there's not. Sorry.
Okay.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
And just to add on a bit more context here, I think we're interested in, with respect to PM and ozone, is the population input information and air quality resolution, etc., appropriate for exposure and potentially health impact analyses of future air quality regulations.
Any other questions about 2? So question 3 has similar questions about our population and demographic data, as shifting from the incidence to the population and demographic data. and the same big picture questions, right? Are we choosing the appropriate ones? So there's two key challenges that we have for the data we need for our data, for our population and data demographic inputs. One is the spatial resolution, because we're doing these analyses at a nationwide 12 by 12 kilometer grid, right? And we can go from some reasonably finely spatially detailed unit, block groups or something to that. But would be challenging to go down from state level data or something, right? So we need something with it. We don't need it to match that. We don't need it to be gridded in the same way, but we need it to be spatially detailed enough that we can get to gridded data. And we also need projections that go out decades into the future. And so currently we're using data from Woods and Pool, a private data provider. And one of our questions is this an appropriate choice, or do you have suggestions for others, or both of those? So I'll pause and ask for questions about question 3.
I have a question. Well, can you give us the provenance for the selection of Woods and Pool?
Neil, you're our historian. Nope, can't hear you.
How about now?
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, it's a great question. Woods and Pool happened to be the best available data when we originally developed BenMAP, and they had the appropriately stratified population by race, ethnicity, and projected into the future. And also at that point, there weren't really any other alternatives available. But we would be delighted if there was a non-proprietary solution that we could use instead.
Dr. Nidell?
Yeah, I'm wondering in thinking about the population projections, do we have any, I'm trying to think of everybody's in our group. Do we have any demography experts in our group, any demographers? Because they're usually the ones that are, and I don't recall hearing any at the meeting we had the other day. They seem to be the ones that are kind of experts in these population projections. And I know there's a lot of work being done like in climate change space on population projections. And if we don't have anybody in our group, like, do we have the ability to consult with people who might be able to guide us on this?
Yes, you can certainly ask questions of others.
And to me, that seems appropriate, by the way, just as if it turns out, Matthew, that the point you're making, that we don't have sufficient expertise, we can ask, but we very, very well have people who are familiar enough with the data sets that they can answer this question. But good to know that, yes, we can go ahead and get outside opinions and additional information if not available.
Dr. Kleeman?
I haven't taken the deep dive into the TSD yet, but is this documented at a technical level where we can sort of get into the nuts and bolts of things anywhere in the materials that we've been provided?
This meaning the projection method or the choices?
Yeah, the projection method, any validation data that was sort of constructed to verify that the techniques are reasonably accurate, so on and so forth.
No is the simple answer. That's it's a proprietary data set, and we don't have either the methods or much in the way of validation. That's so if one of the reasons that we'd be delighted with something else.
Would the term black box then be appropriate to describe that piece of this?
I think so.
All right,
Yes.
thank you.
Any other questions about question 3? Yes, Dr. Neptune.
One question that I had about 3E is the whole idea of other characteristics. I wasn't quite sure what that actually reflected, because there are kind of, I think, 4 drivers of of effects kind of across these subpopulations, at least in I think the way that you typically think about it. But I didn't know if there were some other types of characteristics that you were thinking of, or how we should kind of think about that particular question.
Elizabeth, do you want to answer
Sorry,
that?
was this on 3C?
3E.
3E.
As in Elizabeth.
The other. I think this is an open-ended question, so I think you can interpret it as you see fit.
And Elizabeth, would it be fair to say that E builds upon D? So in D, we ask, are the data we use to estimate the number of individuals according to poverty status, et cetera, appropriate? And then E, it seems to be asking whether there might be other population characteristics that could also be helpful when we report estimates of benefits.
I think that's a valid point. I mean, to go back to not getting ahead of other offices that are trying to direct the EJ analytical approaches, this might be a thinner line.
Okay.
Yes, Dr. Tessam.
Hi. Maybe if I can just, I'll say maybe what you're not saying. Is this all because the administration isn't currently considering race as a factor for environmental injustice groups?
So I think that what you're referring to are the Justice 40 and CJIS initiatives, and those do at least are moving toward not evaluating race. We in the regulatory impact analyses and evaluation of rural impacts, we are not bound by those same restrictions.
Okay, thanks.
I just wanted to also emphasize that this area is really important to sort out. We just submitted a paper that shows, even in the U.S. Census, how there's misclassification when you deal with race and ethnicity. So I think we absolutely should get the latest from the experts in demography and the right terminology and nail this down.
Great. Okay, let's so I'm just also keeping track of the clock. I think we'll go past our 2:20 on the charge questions and shorten up the demonstration, and I think that'll work out just fine with the demonstration notes. But those two jointly will work out, be done in time on our schedule. So let's shift to question 4. So this is the one with many subparts. I'm over here to click to the next page. So there's the question about the segmented lag that Neil mentioned earlier. There were some questions about, and then many subparts, most of which are specific questions about specific health endpoints, about our choices for those, and the details of how we're valuing those things. So let me ask if there's questions about question 4. Dr. Nidell.
Yeah, I'm wondering that it seems like some of these issues we're trying to deal with are going to overlap across the charge questions. And because in particular, like I'm thinking about, both the comment Eden made earlier and then part of the conversation we had on Wednesday, that when you think about like, different endpoints that we might focus on and different groups of exposure, there's a lot of evidence on like in utero effects of exposure to pollution. And those may show up, when somebody's 40 or 50 years old. So something like looking at like just like a 20-year kind of long-term structure isn't necessarily going to get at that. And also it's not really a long-term exposure. It might be a short-term exposure, but it's delayed effects. So when we're thinking about things where they're crossing charges, and maybe in my case, I think I'm on both charges 1 and 5, so that's fine. It's going to come up. How should we be thinking about addressing that when things might be crossing charges, like in that kind of instance? So it's both new points, new endpoints, and thinking about different time structures and different groups and their exposure.
Is it fair to say is that a question of should you make some point in one of the questions or the other or both? Is that a way to reframe what you're getting at, or?
Yeah, is that one way in which we should be thinking about it when it's crossing those charges?
I think we're going to defer to y'all on that. We're going to read the discretizing anything is often a little funny, right? We're going to read and respond to the entire document and take it all seriously, right? So if you make a point in one spot or a different spot or both spots, I think any of that is okay with us. Yeah, Ms. Robinson?
Yeah, in the sub questions under question 4, I feel like not all of them, but several of them are sort of asking the same question over and over again. They're asking about whether you should use a willingness to pay or cost of illness estimate. And if you choose one or the other, how should you construct or select the particular estimate? I'm assuming that when we're writing this up, we could sort of set up some sort of general principles and then talk about the details. But I also think this is an area where it's going to be hard to I forget what phrase you use. It's going to be, the questions seem to lend themselves to saying, oh, you should use these particular studies, the way they're worded. But I think what you said earlier was that was not what you wanted. So
yes, and so we have a current set of criteria in the TSD for choosing studies that prioritizes the use of willingness to pay studies over cost of illness studies.
Yeah.
And for lots of these outcomes, there aren't many willingness to pay studies that we've been able to find, right? There are lots of cost of illness studies, and the cost of illness and both willingness to pay or cost of illness could vary. So yeah, so I think that there's a tension there. If we're missing something in the current state of the science, then we would appreciate that. But yes, our real goal, we would appreciate that, particularly insofar as we can reflect it, particularly to the extent that we can reflect it in our, ongoing practices and criteria of manual, so we can keep updating in the future.
Yeah, I have lots of more detailed questions on this that are probably best talked about with people who are working on the question. But the other question I had is under J, you're talking about increment adjustment factors. You said earlier that you're not asking about the VSL. Jay intended to only look at the non-fatal endpoints for the income elasticity.
Let me get back to you about that. 'Cause I should, unless Neil, you have an answer off the top of your head, I would have to double check where our VSL income adjustment is coming from.
So I know the answer to the question. The question is whether you want us. So, I just, in the interest of full disclosure, I did a lot of work on this stuff for you guys and other agencies. My question is actually whether, what I feel like what you said earlier is you're not asking us to address VSL. And all I'm asking now is whether under question J, you want us to address VSL or just the non-fatal, the values for non-fatal endpoints.
To the extent that you could recommend either an approach for developing income growth adjustment factors or specific income growth adjustment factors that are applicable both to morbidity and mortality, that would be useful to us. Recommendations on alternative VSLs would be out of scope.
Okay. It says income adjustment is, so you're, from what you just said, Neil, it sounds like you just want the estimates of how income grows over time, not the income elasticity. Is that what you, how to interpret that?
That's fair. That's fair.
Okay.
Dr. Neptune?
Yeah, and this is probably a very straightforward answer, but I'm a pulmonologist, and so I have to ask, why isn't COPD kind of one of the kind of disease kind of states that's being integrated in these assessments? I looked at this from many different perspectives, given that you have lung cancer, you have acute MI, and obviously you have asthma and rhinitis and all of that. Is there a clear reason why it's not?
Either Neil or Elizabeth, could you, like, was that not in our ISA, or are we not able to find appropriate risk estimates?
Yeah, Elizabeth might know for certain, but my recollection was even if the endpoint itself was causal or likely causal, which I can't recall for PM, whether it was causal or likely causal, within that umbrella, we're looking for epidemiologic studies that are best suited to quantifying respiratory related outcomes. And it's possible that we found a better total respiratory concentration response parameter than we did a COPD concentration response parameter. Because I think we described this in the TSD. We prefer to quantify a broader range of impacts than we do specific impacts. So in other words, a broader class of ICD codes rather than a narrow class of ICD codes. Partly because we think we can get a better powered estimate from the literature, and partly because it's easier to get baseline incidence rates for a broader range or class of ICD codes.
So you're folding COPD in with asthma? Is that the idea?
I would have to look at the range of ICD codes.
Okay.
I can't answer that definitively. Okay. Yeah.
So I believe that it is folded in for endpoints such as hospital admission and emergency room visits. We look at a overall respiratory ICD code set for those. I believe it's also included in mortality for both for PM and likely also for ozone, because we look at all-cause mortality for PM and respiratory mortality for ozone. Okay. But for living with COPD, we would have also required the ISA to have specific information on COPD being a specifically supported outcome, and then also have information relating exposure to onset of COPD, not just admission to a hospital for COPD. So that is most likely where the scientific evidence did not allow us to include it as a health endpoint.
Okay.
Dr. Newbold.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify what I think I heard Neil say a moment ago in response to Lisa's question about adjusting for income. And what I think I heard is comments about how income changes over time are in scope, but not about how values for mortality risk changes might be adjusted for income differences. Is that correct?
So to the extent that the panel can identify suitable alternative income growth adjustment factors that apply to mortality, we would gratefully receive those. To be clear, we're just not looking for any input regarding the VSL unit value itself.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So Neil, so there's an income change over time, and then there's an elasticity which translates to a VSL change over time. And each part of that would be in scope, or one part in scope and one part out of scope.
There's a third piece of that as long as you're gonna, so
Sure.
there's the, how do we estimate income growth over time, which is something that you've looked at and others have looked at. There's the how does VSL react to those income changes over time, which I think you've said is out of scope. But when you have these estimates for these non-fatal effects, there's also questions of how those change over time. The willingness to pay numbers should be sensitive to income. The cost of illness numbers are going to be sensitive to things other than income. But I'm assuming from what you just said that things that have to do with extrapolating the values for non-fatal cases over time are in scope. The things that have to do with extrapolating VSL estimates over time are out of scope. Is that fair?
So the morbidity is in scope. The VSL unit value is out of scope for our purposes. And both the projections and the elasticity of the VSL with change with respect to income change term. We should double check that.
Yeah,
There'd also be elasticity with spatial differences in wealth in different parts of the United States, right? So is that considered part of the unit VSL and therefore out of scope, or is that in scope?
That's we may be getting too far down in the weeds, but
Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, EPA usually doesn't adjust economic values for income differences within the US.
Okay.
Are there other questions for question 4? Okay, let me shift to question 5. So question 5 is really about how we think about uncertainty. I'll shift the page here. There we are. Of all sorts. So we currently have a Monte Carlo simulation approach to modeling uncertainty, and it's sort of all subsumed there. But we have model uncertainty, we have sampling uncertainty in the underlying studies. And what all these questions are about, how should we model and communicate uncertainties in our methods? So any questions? Okay. So those are the questions about the PSD and the methods of what we're doing. And then the next questions are about our data, about our implementation of those methods. So question 6 is about all of the data sets that are in BenMAP and asking, are they ones that are chosen, appropriate? Yeah, and let me skip to that. I thought, there we are. Yeah, so any questions about question 6? Okay. Question 7 is about the presentation results and the transparency of the tool. And this is another of those questions where we're really looking at asking, from a user standpoint, are we helping the user here? So any questions about question 7?
So let's say again regarding, we're not evaluating the cloud version yet, but trying to prepare for that. I mean, how user evaluation is extremely judgmental, and we need something.
It is, so we are providing with the cloud version and asking you to evaluate that. I'll give you a demonstration of that next. That's what those accounts are. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. And question 8 is sort of more broadly about the user experience, and this, does it help the user make good analytic decisions or make those hard? Any questions about question 8? Okay. Question 9. What should make us request peer review in the future? Any questions about question 9? Yeah, it's Dr. McConnell.
I don't have a question on question 9, but on question 8, is the cloud version already available to the public? And that's why we're evaluating that, or is this a beta version that we're being asked to comment on?
It is
I'm trying to
available
get access to it now. Will when I get on, will I see the cloud version, or will it be the current version?
When you get on, it'll be the cloud version. And it is available to the public. And we anticipate shifting to that version for regulatory analysis. And
for right now, the desktop version the downloadable version is still available?
It is from the EPA's BenMAP, main BenMAP community edition, BenMAP-CE website. You can still download the desktop application.
Thanks.
Okay. And then question 10 is just quite broad. Are there other software development, computer science trends we should be aware of and thinking about for future improvements? Yes, Dr. Brennicore.
Yeah, I guess for that one, I guess could you talk a little bit? Is the scope of that to be considered kind of broad or narrow? And I guess as a specific point, does software development include developments in the atmospheric models that'll presumably be providing input for BenMAP?
So those would be specifically those would be out of scope. So we don't anticipate. No, BenMAP is going to keep taking in air quality modeling results as an input. Is that what you were thinking of? Like we're not planning on moving air quality modeling into BenMAP.
Or were you? Sorry,
is that what you're thinking? Yeah. Or were you thinking of something else? Were you thinking about object models?
Thinking this just as an example, like I know that there's a lot of changes going on within CMAC. So I'm just wondering if we should should we talk about emerging trends in software development, specifically CMAC? How does that, are there things going on in there that should kind of help set priorities for BenMAP development?
So I really like that question because that makes me think about how, as you noted, photochemical modeling is going to change over time. So one question we might have as well is how well can BenMAP incorporate, for example, spatially resolved estimates of changes in PM and ozone from CMAC? How well, for example, could it take 2 or more pollutants or 2 or more stressors? Can it take model predicted concentrations at the daily scale, at the hourly or minute? Those are the sorts of questions I think that could be potentially helpful to address.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on the charge questions? Okay. Yes, Dr. McConnell.
So this may be a naive question. You know, NO2 is an important criteria pollutant. I think it gets evaluated periodically. Why is this restricted to PM and ozone? I guess it could be expanded to other criteria pollutants, but NO2 seems like that's an important regulatory topic.
Neil, do you want to field that one?
Sure. So part of the reason we're focused on PM and ozone is because those are the 2 pollutants for which we have the most epidemiologic evidence. And those are the 2 pollutants that we most commonly model when we're considering policy changes. And it's entirely valid to ask, well, should you not quantify NO2 related impacts? And part of the reason we didn't include NO2 is because there haven't been very many policies for which we've been asked to quantify those impacts. So we thought we would invest our efforts initially in PM and ozone.
Thanks.
Dr. Spack?
So COVID-19 may be presenting itself as a mass disabling event that affects future cardiovascular and respiratory health baseline incidence, concentration response. Would you like comments on that prospective data need and uncertainty embedded in each of these charge questions, or only in the future peer review and future development sections? And are they in scope in general?
Yes, wherever we would appreciate those comments, wherever they are appropriate under whatever charge question they're appropriate. That's obviously something we've been discussing. And we would particularly appreciate it if you have recommendations on data sets, modeling approaches, how we should model these things in light of COVID-19. Both the effects, both, right, all around, the effects that it has on the population and the people's health directly, and the extent to which our lots of our existing studies rely on pre-COVID-19 data. Dr. Russell?
Yeah, sort of a different line. And this goes to, I guess my question is how do you view the evolution of BenMAP, and particularly now BenMAP on the cloud in the future, and what's going to drive it, and how able will the community be to help or to participate in the evolution of BenMAP on the cloud versus having a desktop version? So the real question is how is going to the cloud going to help BenMAP evolve and stay abreast of the science? And how do you foresee that happening?
I think generally we don't anticipate. I think I may be misunderstanding your question, because we don't anticipate changes that are due to being on the cloud platform.
In part, it would be adding additional capabilities. Let's say to do uncertainty analysis in a more direct way, or things like that, and the ability to more readily integrate other types of data that might go in.
So we do plan on making it. We plan on making it so that users can upload more data than they currently can in the cloud version. So right now, we haven't yet implemented adding your own population distribution, for example, or incidence distribution. That's something that we anticipate likely integrating into future versions. It seems like, I think you're asking, it seems like you have something more specific in mind that I'm not answering.
Well, no, I'm not sure I have something more specific, but one of the things I might get concerned about is by making this software somewhat more readily used for a few types of analyses, you may be diminishing its applicability to a wider set of analyses. And you can actually look at CMAC as part of that. Is that, there was an early vision that it would become driven by a GUI. No one does, just because it is too limiting and it didn't really help. And so I do have a concern that going this direction might limit what the evolution of BenMAP and how it might be used. And you say it could be. Well, one thing you did say is that, or didn't say, was making the source code available. And you indicated you would make the data available, but not the source code.
So the source code is currently available.
So,
and we will.
Cloud version.
Yes, for the cloud version.
Okay.
Yeah. And for the desktop version.
Yeah, for the desktop version, I wasn't sure what was available for the cloud version.
Yes, this will email you the links to the Git repositories for that. It's currently publicly available.
Okay.
I believe it's linked in the user manual also, but we can email you that specifically.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering what are the plans for its evolution and such.
So there is, right, I agree that there's this tension between different uses, right? And our primary use case that we're thinking of is the agency's use for regulatory analysis is our top priority, but we use it for other things too. Right?
Yeah.
And so streamlining it for regulatory analysis only makes it harder to do other things, right? There's this trade-off, like higher low-level programming languages. We anticipate sort of much like the desktop version, continuing with incremental expansions and capability while prioritizing these internal uses. We don't have a 5-year plan of features by year or anything like that. But these concerns seem like something that would be appropriate for y'all to comment on. Dr. McConnell?
Yeah, I have a couple of general comments. One related to the question that you just had. I think there are a lot of new things that could be done as you gear up the cloud version. I think you should be careful about removing features that are available on the desktop version, and in particular, if there's capacity now to change outcomes or to change concentration response functions, that may not be something that's of interest to EPA over the longer term, but I think it's important for the user at the community level, and I would think it would be important for you guys as well, because it gives you a tool and the flexibility to be able to think, well, what would be the impact if we change this concentration response function? So I think if it's not available already, that would be a good thing to think about incorporating. But I think if it is available, I'd be really careful about degrading the tool by taking away flexibility. That this is maybe jumping ahead of the game, but I have a hard time imagining that's not going to be a subject of discussion by the group. And then the other sort of big picture question is, these are you guys know this software probably better than anybody in the world, and you thought really carefully about it, and I assume that a lot of these questions reflect sort of specific experience that you've had. So I think it'd be important. You invite us because we'll come with a new perspective. We may think of things that you haven't thought of before and give you advice on that, and that will be useful. But I also think as this develops, it'd be important to have sort of regular access to you guys and regular sort of a mechanism so we don't go off and do things that aren't addressing what you really want from us, and so that we don't waste our time on things that aren't useful. That's just a general question. So I know you've offered to make yourself available, but I think having that formalized, I think, will be important to you getting what you need.
Makes sense. And that makes sense, and we'll think about that. And to your first comment, that sounds like a great thing for the panelists to discuss. Let me take one or two more questions and then shift to demonstrating the new cloud version. Dr. Brennecore?
Yeah, I guess in a similar vein to the previous two questions, will, I guess, both present data that's available within BenMAP and future data, whether it's population projections or projections about baseline disease rates and that kind of thing, will those be available publicly, or is that something that we should directly kind of comment on, presumably under question 10?
Present data. Is the present data in the desktop version? Would that be available publicly?
Yeah.
In the cloud version, is that?
Yeah, so I guess to
Actually-
ask it again, like, so there's I'm assuming that the data that was available under BenMAP CE is now currently sitting in the cloud version. Will that be available to be extracted by anybody publicly? And for future data that gets developed for this cloud version, whether it's population estimates or background disease rates or anything along those lines, will that be able to be kind of extracted from the cloud version and downloaded separately as well? Separate version or separately, like, is that an issue that we should comment on?
Yeah, so that
under question 10.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to comment on, right? If that's an important user priority as a user, comment on it. We are planning on making archived versions available. So each new rollout of the cloud, we will archive on the EPA site, and you'll be able to download that, and that will include all the data. But it won't be, it won't be a trivial user task to extract. So if that's an important thing, then discuss it amongst the panel. Dr. Tessum.
I just wanted to ask, to help us provide recommendations, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your kind of philosophy going forward regarding the community of users of BenMAP and potential contributors. So I'm looking at the GitHub page for BenMAP CAE, which is the community edition. But I noticed that it looks like 15 people total that have contributed to the code of the model itself. I know that there are probably people out there, probably including myself and maybe my students going forward, maybe Jonathan too. It seems like he's also doing something related that would have contributed code to BenMAP to help it work for our own purposes if we thought there was kind of an on-ramp to do that. But maybe we're kind of ending up making our own implementations of something very similar.
Yeah.
So the question is that kind of integration something that you're looking to do in the future, or more focused on just kind of keeping it be a one-way kind of street where you develop it and then people use it?
We have very much been thinking about it as a one-way street, which to some extent is because we hadn't thought about anything else as a default, not as a intentional decision. We so I think that's something that you could comment on and discuss again. We'd have to. I will look into the. Yeah, there may be constraints on our ability to use genuinely open source code, but I would. I'll look into that. Okay, so I'd like to shift gears. Let me write that note down. Okay, so
sorry, just to add one thing to that. There is a peer review, public comment nature to a lot of the analyses we do. So, just to put into context, it's not something that we can just bring in. We have to bring in, be transparent about it, have it publicly reviewed, and then it potentially can come into the analytical approach.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'd like to shift gears. These are all good comments. I'm sure more will come. So yes, please email me or Neil or Holly, who can address, and we'll get back to you. But I'd like to shift gears for today to a demonstration of the new cloud version. So I'm going to share a different screen. Okay, so our new cloud version, you should see EPA.gov now. This implement means that, so to access this, you'll load up your browser. Let me pull my notes too as I am shifting gears. And this is going to be a somewhat different way of thinking about things. And so now you pull up your browser. Many of you have created accounts to use BenMAP. You'll create an account, sign in. In the cloud version, you'll go to the BenMAP. You'll be able to the BenMAP that looks like a website, and input things like what you did in the desktop version. Here's my air quality maps or surfaces. Here's the various things I'd like to value, and then click go, and it starts a run. And some computers, off in server farms go think about it for a while, and then at some later point, your run is ready, and you can download the results. Typically, these take a few minutes, 3 to 5 for most currently. That varies depending on load and queuing and such. There's a limited number of these computers allocated to this account. And so if more people click go at a time than there are computers allocated, speaking loosely here, then they get queued up and all happen in a row. Okay. And then you can download your results when they're done. So we go to BenMAP's website, benmap.epa.gov. And once you're logged in there, you see a page like this. So you can do two things. You can start a new analysis from scratch, or you can use an analysis template. What a template is a set of all the saved analytic choices you've made before. The idea here is if you did a run yesterday and you want to choose all the same functions, but either redo it because you want to double check something, or upload and use a new air quality surface or air quality change, and then run it through all the same quantification choices, then your template makes it easy so you don't have to click through and choose everything the same way. Okay, so we're going to start a new analysis. So you click new analysis. And right now, the spatial extent that we have implemented is US national. We plan to make that more flexible in the future. These are all grayed out as examples, but they aren't currently selectable. So US national is your only choice. And we have PM and ozone. So I'm going to choose PM. And as before, feel free to raise hands with questions.
Can you choose them both at the same time?
You cannot.
Okay.
It's currently single pollutant, one or the other.
Okay.
There's a set of surfaces you can use. So these first four are ones that we have loaded in before. I loaded in a couple also. You can, or these many, and you can choose them. This isn't because you're going to run all the surfaces that I use as my demo. Obviously, what's going on here is when you upload your new surface, you can click this add button. You choose to browse your own. Use a standard file browser, add your own, upload it, and then it appears in this list. So these lists will be all of your surfaces to choose from. So I'm going to choose pre-policy baseline map, post-policy scenario map, and it shows a couple of summary statistics at the bottom. This is just intended as a sanity check. So I see that my mean value is 4.68 in the one and 4.66 in the other. So if I was expecting numbers that were in the teens and I got a 4, then I would know that something was up. I also but also see that the average went down a little bit. So I think I probably didn't get them flipped and put them in the wrong spots. So simple sanity checks. Dr. Nidell.
This, sorry if I missed it. This is what's currently live now that someone logs on to EPA. And are there, right, are there descriptions of what these different things mean? Like, you know, PM 2.5 annual baseline, 1235 full attain?
Probably not. I should double check that. There's samples to use, so we didn't really document those names. Yeah. Dr. Bonacor.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about, or I guess maybe post, like what, if you wanted to upload your own custom CSV, like what kind of formatting requirements does it have?
It's the same formatting as the desktop version. So yeah.
Thanks.
Let's discuss that offline if we need to. It's the same formatting as the desktop version. Yeah. So briefly, that formatting is what it's expecting is, you know, is the 12 by 12 kilometer grid in a standard format that's described in the user formula in the user manual. It's more or less a very big CSV with some specified columns. Dr. Tesson.
If you have a, like, say there's a grad student or something that needs to run 10,000 different simulations, what would the workflow for that be?
One of our next features to run will be to make that easier. No, so the desktop version had a method that you could, people typically used it through the GUI. Many users used it through the GUI, but you could also run it from the command line with text files, right, with scripts. We're planning on not implementing exactly the same scripting. Instead, we're planning on implementing a permutation approach. You would still be uploading them more or less individually, and then clicking, I want to pair all of these with all of those kind of thing, with all these years. The template functionality will facilitate that some, but it won't be as smooth as a script that, you know, was automatically generated in a loop and points to directories.
Will there be support for users kind of spinning up their own server and they could run it locally to avoid crashing the government computers?
So we would appreciate that. What we've got support, what we are certainly going to support is to make it able to download a snapshot of each new version of the software or database that can then be run in VMware locally. If other abilities are important, then I would encourage you to discuss that with the other panelists. Okay. So now we've uploaded our 2 air quality maps that we're going to be comparing. We've chosen them. And then we're going to choose population sets. Currently, as I said, we only have our one choice available, and you don't have the ability to upload more. You can choose year also. So that'll do things like, you know, specify the year of the population data to use. The year can differ from the year of your air quality surface. That's intentional on our part, because often, you know, we find people want to use air quality runs from, you know, every 5 years or something, and then use the nearest air quality run with each year's population data, something like that. So we want to preserve that flexibility. So I'm going to choose 2030 pretty arbitrarily, and then I'm going to choose incidence data. choose national incidence data. Okay, so you can choose each of these. We have a few standard baskets of health effects defined right now. These will be shown in detail in a moment. The idea here is that typically we find we're not wanting to run, we're wanting to run the same set of morbidity outcomes, for example, or we want to focus on death. And so instead of clicking on each morbidity outcome individually, we just say, I want to choose all the chronic effects. And it takes a second, and then it gives us a list of everything here. So we have a variety of studies for different age bins. And so we break it out by each, we're applying the Peters et al. Study for non-fatal AMIs to all the age bins from 18 to 69. We're applying each of these, we can scroll down and see there's a lot of them. Okay. And continue. Here we're going to enter a task name. So the cloud nature here is that I'm going to, in a moment, click go, and it's going to go off into server land and think for a while, and then it'll be done in a few minutes. And then I want to know which run was that. So I'm going to call this Maniloff SAB demo 01-13-23. 01-13-23. And submit task. So this is the quick go. And okay, view my tasks. So I'm going to choose view my tasks. And this says, you can see in the active and pending tasks, it is setting up right now, and then it'll start going and it'll tell us how long it's been thinking for. And then down below, you see all the various things I've run before. We have the data center. So for a data center, these are the things that you can look at. You can choose to manage your tasks, which currently is to see them or to download the results once they're done. You can also see the air quality maps. I'll choose PM, and we see all the air quality maps that I have in my account. I have this base one that we just ran in my account. That's one I uploaded the other day. You won't be able to see that because that's mine and not yours. And then in a few minutes, we don't have it set up to alert you currently, but in a few minutes it'll run and then be done. I'll be in about 4 minutes. So yeah, let me pause and ask for more questions.
So you looked for, you're just looking at chronic diseases right now. But could you have clicked all of those links at once and clicked and just got everything, got the mortality, chronic disease, everything? You could click as many outcomes as you want in one.
I could have clicked them all. Yeah. Okay. I could have clicked them all. It would have taken longer. It would have been a bigger results file to download. But if that's what you want, click them all.
All right. I'll have to ask my students what's taking them so long now.
They always appreciate that. Dr. Kleeman.
What's the timeline for getting higher spatial resolution on the population data? I mean, that seems pretty limiting right now. If I think about what I'm trying to do with this tool, I want 1 kilometer. I want high spatial resolution. We're trying to drive down to neighborhood scales. That seems pretty obvious. There must be a timeline for developing this.
There's not a detailed timeline. And I'll we're talking about some of the analytic challenges. I mean, right, to some extent it's right. If all the computers can get faster, right, the data is available. It's not a purely data limitation. It's not a computational limitation. There's a where the people are limitation. So once we move to the 1 kilometer grid, then we're currently using residence as a measurement of where the person is, right? That's in our population data. And we're not sure how confident to be in that assumption at finer spatial scales. People spend their days at a workplace. I mean, I'm in my house right now, but many people spend their work days at a workplace that is not in the same 1
Sure.
kilometer grid cell. So
But that's a science question that you should let us worry about. Don't prevent us from using the tool to explore it.
That sounds like a
I guess
science
I'm
question,
uploading.
but
I'm not criticizing. I'm just
yeah.
not trying to maybe talk to my colleagues in this, and I'm trying to upload this issue. So
yeah, it's something. It's a limiting factor, right? The 12 kilometer grid is large on the scale of things that a lot of researchers are exploring, and it's large on the scale of a lot of spatial population heterogeneity, right? On a lot of things. And if that's something that y'all think we should prioritize developing, there's some computational and expense issues, but there's also some science question issues. And we would support guidance on how to proceed there.
Thank you.
Dr. Nadeau.
Yeah, Pete, so when you clicked on the outcome of interest and then it showed all of the different studies that had, given a beta that we could use. I guess a two-part question. One is, are you able to select a particular study if that's what you want? If not, how is the information across the different studies combined? Is that part of what task 5 is asking about, or charge question 5 about dealing with the uncertainty in parameter estimates?
So right now, the way the results work is that, so a couple of parts of that. Right now, the way the results output will work is that you will get a result for each of those at the chosen spatial level. And then you can download a CSV and you can sum them however you want or report them separately however you want. We don't currently have the ability for you to choose them one by one. I mean, it's straightforward from a software engineering standpoint to add that, right? Like it's a drop down or something. There's a tension about making the interface more complicated or less complicated, right? BenMAP's desktop version has gotten quite complicated. And so we've sort of gone the other way with this, but we'd be welcome to feedback. And so you can currently get whichever one you want that we have, just along with all the others. And you can't currently upload your own.
Thanks.
Yeah, Dr. Kleeman.
Sorry, just watching the queue here, thinking about how I would be feeling as I watched every 5 seconds in my watch, and is there an ETA function built into this so that you have some clue about when this might run? Should I come back tomorrow, or is it going to finish in 3 minutes?
Typically, I'm a little surprised. So typically they take about 4 minutes. And I'm not sure what's going on with this one.
Well, I think
that's not your real question, right? No, there's not an ETA. And there's not an alert.
Seems like both those features would be handy for people trying to, run small jobs where they want interactive behavior. I mean, we can batch something and then, come back in a couple of days because we know it's going to be massive. It looks like somebody beat you to the queue and is doing that already, but it'd be nice to have something or set up a separate queue for interactive use. Might be nice.
Yeah, so I think these are that makes a lot of sense. We're slightly different user populations, right? And y'all have a lot of good ideas on what would be useful for your lab groups, and those would all be good things for the panel to discuss and provide recommendation or suggestions on. Dr. Russell.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I mean, so if you look at one of the charge questions being uncertainty, and you talked about doing a Monte Carlo approach. So when this is running, is most of the, how much computational savings can be had by if you're doing a Monte Carlo simulation, if the software was constructed to reuse some of the analyses, or is it currently when you're doing a Monte Carlo simulation, you're basically just going back and rerunning, reloading, etc., from ground zero?
I would say in general, we have put relatively little effort into optimizing runtime, or memory, or any of the other things one might optimize. That hasn't been there are relatively few times when EPA users are really constrained by that. They happen, but we haven't put a ton of resources into optimizing that. So I don't have a good answer. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some low-hanging fruit. Yeah, still pending. I don't know why it's just hung. I'm surprised. That's unfortunate timing. Other questions? Yeah.
Since we're just waiting, have you put any thought to malicious use of this shared resource?
So some, but we're probably not as creative as the malicious users. So we would appreciate guidance on best practices.
Like, for example, if you have to, do an analysis in order to pass a regulation, and a crowd of users, for example, create accounts and submit tasks to choke up your server so that the EPA staff can't actually do an analysis, and then you wouldn't be able to promulgate your regulation. Right?
Yeah, we're working on our policies around both prioritizing, on an administrative backend, around prioritizing different users or different runs, and around freezing runs or users. We don't anticipate doing that absent exorbitant use, but we're developing policies around that. Let me just go ahead and click instead a different run to show results. So eventually it gets to completed tasks, and you can view or export results two different ways. One is, so this is a run I did at the national level for all-cause mortality, and it gives a average change in air quality, change in incidence. So this would have been a pure incidence run that didn't include valuation, and then we can do a download. So I'm going to go with nation, and it'll do that.
Pete, can I ask a question while we're looking at this?
Sure.
Why, just looking at the 5 different studies, why is there such a different amount for the population exposed? Wouldn't they all be national estimates, or is there something about, like, the Woodruff et al. Study only focuses on the East, so it only does population exposure for the East? Is that what's driving that kind of difference?
What's driving it in this case is they focus on different age ranges. So the Woodruff et al. Study is for infant mortality.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah. Okay. So this is what I wanted to show you for our demonstration. So I'll stop sharing. And yeah, so we would appreciate comments on all of these. You know, thinking about the scope. You know, that we're focused on BenMAP, which brings in air quality. But yeah, let me ask for any other questions.
So Pete, just to respond a bit more to a question from earlier about the air quality resolution. So I think it's important to know that for this review, we're not asking about the air quality inputs. That is separate from BenMAP. We're asking about what BenMAP should be doing. And BenMAP can handle higher resolution air quality information, although that would come with, of course, additional time and resource costs. And considering the main pollutants we're focused on, PM and ozone, which are, you know, long range regional pollutants, the benefits of a higher resolution for a regional pollutant is a consideration, and also because a lot of the rules we work on are federal and apply to the entire United States. The processing requirements of evaluating the entire contiguous US, for example, at a different resolution. So just balancing concerns to consider when thinking about different resolutions.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, thanks for being explicit. And that resource consideration, that particular software development resources is a real one for us. Dr. Kleeman.
I guess just to continue this conversation, you know, having submitted environmental justice studies related to air pollution in the past, and I think that you touch on EJ in a couple of the different questions that are posed to the committee. You know, this 12 kilometers is usually not state of the science. It's difficult to publish anything at that spatial resolution in this topic area. So I think that spatial resolution is somewhat intertwined with those other questions, which perhaps have been explicitly posed to the committee. So I just want to point that out, that those two things are not unrelated. Those two things are very connected.
Thank you. Okay. Other questions or comments? If not, I think we're prepared to move to Dr. Schindell's item with the charge question assignments and next steps.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. Manilow, and to Neil Fan as well. That was fantastic to get firsthand answers to many of our questions. And as you can see, the panelists are good at coming up with questions. So I'm sure we will continue to this interaction and find out more from you. We in our administrative meeting to set up this panel earlier in the week discussed charge question assignments, and for anybody who was not at that meeting, including anybody in the general public, we are endeavoring to have a decent number of balance and panel members participating with at least a few to half a dozen on any individual question. And not overloading any individual panelists with having to answer, say, all 10 questions. All of the panel will, of course, weigh in, though. So we have discussed amongst the panelists the draft assignments to the individual 10 charge questions. I thank several of you on the panel for getting back to me after the administrative meeting with requests for consideration of shuffling around the draft assignments. Now that you have had a chance to discuss all 10 charge questions and see the presentation and demonstration of how BenMAP works, I hope that you feel more enabled to weigh in on exactly where you would like to be. So we'll give everybody an additional opportunity to provide any feedback you might have, anybody on the panel there, feedback you might have on your draft assignments. And if you would like us to consider moving you around, we, again, will endeavor to maintain a balance of workload and coverage of all of the questions, but would certainly be happy to consider requests. And I think that it's looking pretty good as far as our draft assignments gelling into place. So I'm happy if anybody on the panel has immediate questions about the assignments. I'm happy to take those at the present. Otherwise, I would just encourage the panelists to reach out when they're ready. So, Lisa.
I think I may have just, I think you may have just answered my question. I was going to ask you whether you wanted us to comment now. I've already emailed you. I'm sure other people have. And so I can just sit tight, right? You don't need anything more from those of us who have already communicated with you.
Okay. Yes. If you've already reached out to me, or, even if you haven't, if you have nothing in additional to communicate, that's fine. And we'll stick largely with the draft assignments. But if you do have anything that you want to, suggestions to bring to our attention, please go ahead and do so. Given that Monday is a holiday, our intention is to try to get a new set of draft assignments by, the middle of next week. So you have a chance to ponder over the long weekend and let us know then by, say, Tuesday, and we'll try to put everything together and get back to everybody by Wednesday. Anybody else on the panel have questions about procedure at this point? Matthew, please. Dr. Needell.
Yeah, I noticed people were having some issues getting access to BenMAP, and I tried as well, and I had issues. Is Pete, are you the main point of contact if we have issues? So we should just email you directly?
Yes, email me directly, and I'll follow up with you. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks.
I'll put my email address in the chat too.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, I was able to get it to work, so it is conceivable. But thanks, Peter, for helping me when I had questions too. I see Enid, Dr. Neptune, please.
Yeah. I was wondering if we want to compare the web version versus the cloud version, what is the way of accessing the web version? Because you showed us the beta on the cloud. So is there a streamlined approach to accessing the web version, just to see what that kind of looks and feels like?
So the two versions are the version I just showed you, this new cloud version, and the desktop version. And so
yeah, the desktop version.
Yeah, I'll drop a URL into the chat that you can download the old version, the desktop version from, and install it on your local computer.
That's currently operative though, right?
That is currently operative. That's what we're currently using.
Okay.
Okay. We have asked many questions during the past 2.5 hours, so maybe we're all asked out at the moment. I don't see any. Okay, thank you, Peter. So we have Peter's contact and the web address for the desktop version of BenMAP in the chat. We will, just to answer a question that came up early in the chat, the entire live stream Zoomed will be available. So you can also go back and review anything you've missed. And presumably that includes access to the chat. I'm not totally sure how that works, to be honest, but I think that's probably the case. Does anybody know if the chat is available as part of the recording?
The chat is not saved as part of the YouTube. We could capture right now and email it out.
Okay.
Yeah, email it to me, Will.
Thank you, Will. That sounds like it would be handy, just in case people want a quick way to find the some of the links put in there and such.
And Dr. Schindel, you're going to send out a revised version of the assignments spreadsheet?
Well, I would send that. I wasn't intending to send one at the moment, but rather to wait for.
Oh yeah, once you hear back from everybody.
Yes. Okay. Yes, exactly. So the plan is that we'll have everybody's comments by close of business Tuesday, so that you can think over the holiday weekend. If you have anything to give to us, tell us by Tuesday, and then we will make a new one and a final draft, a final assignments, no longer a draft version, and we'll send that to you by next Wednesday to all the panelists.
One thing, I never got the confirmation after I submitted kind of, my user group or whatever. And should we expect to see a confirmation, even though I could still go on the site to access the cloud version? So maybe it's not required that we get an email confirmation. We can assume that we can go on after a certain period of time. Is that possible?
So the approval is one of our staff manually, clicking to approve you. Sorry, we haven't been doing that for a couple hours because we were preparing for this meeting. But I'll do that this afternoon for anybody who has submitted it, the requests recently. There should be an email, and generally is when you're approved. I want, my first thought is obviously I wonder if that got caught in a filter, but if not, then I don't know what else could have happened, and we'll check.
But there are two stages of approval, right? There's that first part, and then you go in and you update like your information, your profile. And does that require approval, or is that just updated info?
Where was one of them? There's only one approval. There's an automated registration, and then there's me or Neil or one of our staff approving you to the BenMAP group. Yeah.
Did that happen? That was fine. Okay.
It looks like from the chat that most people are getting very quick and effective responses. So hopefully we can iron out the couple of people that have had a little more of a challenge connecting. But it looks like it's, for the bulk of the panel, this is going smoothly. But yes, we don't expect you to be approving while also answering, sitting on the Zoom with us. Good. Well, yes, please follow up then anybody who is still having any connection difficulties. And again, Peter's email is right there in the chat, and it's just last name, first name, first name.
If I could just remind folks that I would be happy to set up help sessions with Dr. Maniloff and Mr. Fan for those who want to further instruction in BenMAP,
Including registration difficulties.
including registration difficulties.
Okay, good. Everybody on the panel, then I guess your assignments going forward are at the moment to think about any requests for change in the charge question assignments. And if you have not yet been able to connect to BenMAP, to keep at it. And then after we have the final assignments by Wednesday of next week, then we can get it into the main body of our work, which is using BenMAP that you will then have access to and reading the 160 or whatever it is pages of the technical support document. And those two things should prepare us for the 10 charge questions. So I guess we can put this in an email as well on Wednesday when we send out the final charge question assignments, just to remind you, but then we will also use that period, the 6 weeks between, well, really now and our in-person meeting at the beginning of March to not only get our thoughts together, but to also ask for further clarification and to take advantage of Holly's offer to arrange meetings with either the EPA staff to put to them additional questions and discussion, or to arrange meetings with those of your panel colleagues who are assigned to the same question, if you feel that would be useful. So everybody will have the list as of next week, and you'll be able to see who's assigned to any given question, and we'll be able to facilitate meetings over the next 6 weeks or so. So that's, I think, all that we have at the moment for procedures going forward. I would, at this point, unless there are any other things, kind of finish up the panel. The panel's work. And first, I want to say thank you to the EPA staff. That was very clear and informative set of presentations. We really appreciate that, and your engagement with us to help us get up to speed on exactly what you would like from us and how we can be most beneficial to your work going forward by our work over the next few months. So thank you to all the panelists as well for participating. Thank you to anybody watching the live streaming or coming back to it later. And I think we are in good shape. Holly, maybe I can turn it back to you if there's anything else.
One last thing I wanted to say, we're very happy that 16 people will be joining us in person in Cary, North Carolina. It will be a hybrid meeting for the others who are not traveling, but that's a pretty amazing statistic. 16 out of 20 will be there in person. So I'm very happy about that.
Fantastic.
Thanks to everybody for joining us this afternoon. We are adjourned.
Thank you all. Enjoy the holiday weekend.
Thanks, Drew.
Thank you.
And Peter, Neil, and Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thank you.